Alright, family, what's going on? What's good? It's your boy T coming back at y'all with another installment. And today, the topic I got for you guys is the political spectrum. Alright, that's right, the political spectrum. Now, quick disclaimer before you shut this video off. You know, there's gonna be a lot of people who disagree with this political spectrum I'm showing, be it people on the left or the right. Only thing I can say is watch this video through and you'll have a better understanding of why this image of the political spectrum looks the way it does. Now, we have to be objective with information now, family. We can't be biased. So once again, give this information I'm sharing with you guys a chance. And if you do your own diligent research, as you all should be doing, you'll see how true or how false this is. Now, to the topic, the political spectrum. What exactly is the political spectrum? Now, the political spectrum is a system of, just laying out political ideologies, be it from the left or the right. Now, when you look at these terms, left, right, those are two terms that is basically speaking of Democrat or Republican. So where you see left, that's speaking of Democrat. Where you see right, that's speaking of Republican. That's basically what each wing represent. Now, I'm not necessarily gonna go too in depth. I'm not necessarily gonna break down these political ideologies or these political theories. You guys could do your own research, and on your own time, you can look up exactly what each one means. But for time's sake, because going into each one can make this video very lengthy, I'm just gonna, briefly touch on why the political spectrum that I am showing you guys look the way it looks, and why I believe this is in my opinion, the best political spectrum that you could find. Now, for starters, as I mentioned, Democrat is left, Republican is right. Then you have what's the center or the independents. To get a overall understanding, especially of politics today in America, most people would consider conservative to be a far right ideology when in actuality it's a center right ideology. Most Republicans in America are conservatives. That would be a center right, not a far right. Now, when it comes to the Democrats in America, most of them are socialists. You hear a lot about democratic socialism. Check out my previous videos on democratic socialism and is socialism good? And you'll get a better understanding of that. Conservative would be more about capitalism. And now, as you can see, you have people who are moderate, in the middle, independent. They take understandings from both sides and then sum things up. As you can see, this is the political spectrum. Now, again, as I said, on your own time, you can do, the due diligence for your own sake and your own understanding, so you can see exactly what each of these ideologies stand for. So now that you got that little bit of an understanding, of the political spectrum, you can see it's real simple, really, to understand. And most people do know, leftism, democratic, right wing would be republicanism. So now, why do I have fascism on the left instead of the right? I'll tell you. Because fascism is a form or an extreme form of Marxism. And I'll prove it to you. So now, What is fascism? By definition, fascism is a governmental system led by a dictator having complete power, forcibly suppressing opposition and criticism, regimenting all industry, commerce, etc., and emphasizing aggressive nationalism and often racism. All right, now let's stop right here. All right? So now let's get a brief understanding of what this is saying. So fascism, a governmental system led by a dictator having complete power. That don't necessarily sound like something that's right wing. Now, when you get to the understanding of what people on the right believe in, people on the right believe in what's called less state government. As I said, check out my previous videos. Republicans or right wingers, they don't want total government control. They want less government control or less state power. The left advocates for more state power, less private ownership. They're in favor of big government. So when we look at fascism, it's a governmental system led by a dictator having complete power. So now let's get a little understanding of what a dictator is, or a governmental system led by a dictator, which would be a dictatorship. So now, real quick, I'm gonna read the definition of dictatorship. A dictatorship is a unitary form of government characterized by a single leader or group of leaders and little or no toleration for political pluralism or independent programs or media. So now, what is this talking about? This is talking about total state control, either by a single leader or a group of leaders. You know, a group of leaders, it don't necessarily have to, a dictatorship don't necessarily have to be by one person. It could be by a group of leaders like a government, a governmental dictatorship, as it says, a unitary form of government. Now, a good example of a dictatorship would be Nazi Germany. As you can see, we have Hitler right here with the same logo that I have for fascism. Now, why is that? Because Hitler was a fascist by definition. He was a dictator and he had complete power. He forcibly suppressed opposition and criticism. He regimented all industry and commerce, and he emphasized an aggressive nationalism and racism. By definition, he was a dictator. But what also was Hitler? Hitler was a member of the Nazi Party, the Nazi Germany Party. Now, if you know anything about the Nazis or the word Nazi, it's a short abbreviation for National Socialist Movement or a National Socialist Movement. Later on, we're going to get into this whole National Socialist Movement thing. But for now, let's just stick with fascism. So now the next portion, forcibly suppressing opposition and criticism. Now, what is this in reference to? Speech, the things that people can say and do. So now, what would be an example of forceful suppression of opposition or criticism? Now, today we hear a lot about hate speech and the suppression of hate speech. Now, what is hate speech? Hate speech is abusive or threatening speech or writing that expresses prejudice against a particular group, especially on the basis of race, religion, or sexual orientation. All right, cool. So now we all could agree that hate speech is bad, right? Nobody would well, I mean, some people probably would, but you know, most people with common sense knows that hate speech is bad. I'm not saying hate speech is good, but hate speech is actually protected by the Constitution, the First Amendment. Once you take away this ability, it's a forceful suppression. People should be able to say what they feel and say what they want. You can be in opposition to anything, and it can be deemed hate speech. Now, again, by definition, it's supposed to be abusive or threatening speech or writing that expresses prejudice against a particular group. So now, who have the power to determine what is hate speech? That would be the state. So now, will we feel comfortable giving the government the okay of coming up with what is hate speech? Like, is it a good thing to allow government to deem a word hateful? What if it turns into a situation where, you know, speaking out against the government is seen as hateful? I want you guys to think about that for a moment. So now, moving forward, regimenting all industry, commerce, etc. Now, again, if you've seen my previous videos, or if you have an understanding of what Marxism is or socialism is, you will understand that this right here is speaking of, as it says, government control, state ownership. This is speaking about the means of production. So the only way a dictator can have complete power and regiment all industry, commerce, etc., which is the means of production, is through state ownership, which is by definition a Marxist theory or economic theory of socialism. So now moving on, and emphasizing an aggressive nationalism and often racism. Now, this is where people will say, see, that's talking about Republicans. The Republicans are the racists. They've been the racists. We hear about it every day on TV. Dom Lemon, he cried on TV because of the racist right wing. You know, a lot of these people, a lot of these politicians, they tell us that the right or the racists are right wingers. Like, for example, they'll say like the neo Nazis and the KKK and things of that nature, they're in favor of the right. Now, are they really? Now, remember when I said that Hitler, the Nazis, was a national socialist movement. So now, what would the neo Nazis be? Let's find out. Now, the national the National Socialist Movement. As you can see, this ADL.org. Uh, let's see what they have to say about the National Socialist Movement. So now, the National Socialist Movement is currently the largest neo-Nazi group in the United States. Now, I want to stop for a moment. A lot of people don't realize that these racist white supremacist group, they are socialists. They're not Republicans. Well, you can have some Republicans that are racist, don't get me wrong. But when you look at these movements like the neo-Nazis, for example, they're socialists. Their whole ideology is based on social constructs, identity politics. I advise you guys to check out my video on race. So now when you get this understanding, you know, you clearly see that this is a communist Marxist ideology. If you know much about, Hitler, you will understand that his programs was based on building a superior race in his country. he wanted to exterminate the weak. This is fascism, family. Again, many people have a misconception about who these people are, these neo Nazis and these white supremacist groups, due to the fact that they've been lied to by media. Now, as I said, the nationalist socialist movement is basically a communist or Marxist system. Many people would try to claim that, you know, these neo Nazis, they're right wingers. They're really not. Their whole ideology is based on historical materialism and social constructs. Basically, social constructs and historical materialism, sorry, social constructs and historical materialism is the root of racism. Now, again, like I said, you could go back and watch my videos on race and watch my other video on socialism, and you'll get a better understanding of these concepts. So now, some people would say, that's the Nazis, you know. Okay, the Nazis, they were, socialists. But the KKK, those were the racist Republicans, right? Well, I would have to say wrong. Again, racism is rooted from communist or Marxist theories. So anytime you hear about racism, usually it's coming from somebody who has a communist or Marxist ideology. Again, Hitler claimed he was a socialist. Now, what I want to do now is actually do a little reading on the Ku Klux Klan because there's a lot of laws that surround the Klan and history around the time the Klan was founded. Either that or a lot of people just don't know the history or they assume the history. Let's get this out the way. And a lot of the laws is due to mainstream media or legacy media. All right, so now let's get a little bit of information about the KKK real quick. All right, I ain't gonna read this whole article. I'm gonna try to, skim through it a little bit. Probably I just read this. Let me see some. I'll probably just read this first. Some of it. I ain't gonna read the whole thing. Now, founded in 1865, the Ku Klux Klan extended into almost every southern state by 1870 and became a vehicle for white Southern resistance to the Republican Party Reconstruction era policies aimed at establishing political and economic equality for Black Americans. Its members waged an underground campaign of intimidation and violence directed at white and Black Republican leaders. Though Congress passed legislation designed to curb Klan terrorism, the organization saw its primary goal, the reestablishment of white supremacy, fulfilled through Democratic victories in state legislatures across the South in the 1870s. All right, so let's stop right here for a moment, family. So now, what exactly is this saying? All right. Basically, what they're saying is the KKK was formed to go against the Republican Party. A lot of people don't realize this, and they waged basically they waged war against white and Black Republicans, as you can see. So now, where did all this talk about the parties switching over? Because we just read about the Nationalist Socialist movement, and as you can see the dates. I mean, it's not much to say about that. Numbers don't lie. Today in America, the Nationalist Socialist movement is the largest neo-Nazi group. Feel me? So all the way back from the Klan till today, you know, they're still socialists. They never changed. There was no shift. See, look, socialists, they're left, not right. So where does this whole ideology of socialism being a right-wing organization come from? I'll tell you. come from socialists. They want to hide their history because they want black people to vote for them, to be honest with you. Now, if we understand how the KKK operated, they operated under fascism, forceful suppression. Like, pardon me, family, I had a little bit of a technical difficulty. But yeah, getting back to where we left off. Basically, the Klan, they were leftists in a nutshell. So as we can see, even from history all the way up until now, the socialist movement have been about identity politics. It's about social constructs, historical materialism, you know, be it good or bad. The left wing extreme, these are the real left wing extremists. This is a left wing extremist. Let's get an example of this left wing extremism. Now here we got right here an article out of the Smithsonian Magazine. Now I'm not going to read this whole thing, but as the headline says, the Colf I'm sorry, as the headline says, the 1873 Colfax massacre crippled the Reconstruction era. Now, what's this about? You guys should read up on the Colfax massacre. It's a lot of things that went on, but you guys got to read up on this stuff so you know the history yourself. Now, this is written April 13th, 2016, and it reads, the Reconstruction period that followed America's Civil War was one of the worst, most violent eras in American history. During that time, thousands of African Americans were killed by domestic terrorists like the Ku Klux Klan, who tried to reinforce antebellum policies of white supremacy. For many historians, one of the worst examples of this violence occurred 143 years ago today, the Colfax Massacre of 1873. Right? Immediately after the end of the Civil War, different factions began fighting over power. Bitter over Confederacy loss, many white Southern Democrats tried their best to continue disenfranchising and restricting the rights of former slaves. At this time, insurgent white supremacist groups terrorized African Americans throughout the South. In Louisiana, the fight over the post war government was particularly bloody. So, now, what is this talking about? This is one of the eras when the KKK was, at its height, formed in, as it said, 1865, and now here we are almost 10 years later. The Colfax Massacre of 1873. Now, the KKK, they weren't the only white supremacist group. Like I said, you had other neo Nazis, but the KKK was one of the strongest. It was one of the groups that actually stood out in history. Now, as it reads, they were Democrats. They weren't Republicans. As we read here, the KKK, they was basically the resistance for white people against the Republican Party Reconstruction era policies. The Republicans, they were the anti-slavery party. And then fast forward today, we still have neo-Nazis calling themselves the National Socialist Movement. Yet people want you to believe these neo-Nazis and the KKK is on the right. They're really not. Their ideology is based on historical materialism, identity politics, social constructs. When you look at the phrases, terminology, and the things that the KKK or neo-Nazis spew, it all has to do with socialism. Everything that these democratic socialist politicians preach, they want that too. But they don't want it for black people. That's the thing. They're more like Hitler. with the fascism, the Nazism. You know, they wanted for the Aryan race or the white race. The same ideologies that Hitler had, that's the same ideology that these members of the of these white supremacist groups have, and they're socialists. They're in no way, shape, or form right wingers. Now we have to get an understanding of that, and with the understanding of that, you will see why fascism is a left wing ideology. It's an extreme version of Marxism that the Nazis held, which would be, by definition, socialist, the National Socialist Party, or the National Socialist Movement. The National Socialist Movement is currently the largest neo Nazi group in the United States. These people are socialist, family. They're not Republicans. These white supremacists are socialists, left wingers. You know, they're fascists, or they believe in fascism. Let's look at what Nazi means. A member of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. That's basically what Hitler was. That this is what Nazi is. So when people tell you that white supremacy and things of that nature is on the right, you will have to ask them, well, what is it that their philosophy consists of that makes them right wing? Everything that their philosophy consists of is socialism. They even call themselves the National Socialist Movement. So why is it that media continue to say that white supremacists are right-wing Republicans? Because they want you to vote for them. That's why. They don't want you to know the truth. They don't want you to know that the real people that are racist are socialists. They don't want you to know that socialism is the birth of racism. And fascism is the extreme version of socialism when you have total government control, which is communism. So now a lot of people will say, why do you have anarchy on the right and not on the left? Well, first I would like to say anarchy is indeed a left wing ideology. How? For the people who are left and don't believe that it's a left wing ideology. Well, in America, we have what's called a free market system. By default, America is a capital by default, America is a capitalist country. So the only way for somebody to be a anarchist in America is for them to want to overthrow this system by any means. Now today you have groups like Antifa. Many believe in socialism, but they're not like a traditional socialist. They're more so a fascist. But the thing is, they don't have a government. It's like they have fascist principles. Now, anarchy being on the right, how would anarchy fit on the right? People would ask. Now, you have what's called anarcho capitalism. Now, what is anarcho capitalism? Now, I'm not necessarily going to read this whole thing because it's a little confusing to read, and I'd rather just explain it. You can press pause and read it on your own. But to sum things up, anarcho capitalism is a political philosophy and economic theory that favors private ownership. This is basically what makes it right wing. Now, I have to be honest, in its totality, anarcho capitalism is not right wing. Let me explain. Capitalism, right? It's a system of private ownership. So this is what subliminally makes anarcho-capitalism right wing, so to say. You can say it's right wing, but you have to look at it in its totality. Now, even though it's about the elimination of centralized states, it's in favor of private agencies, as in like private ownership and control, and basically self-regulating without a centralized state. Now, what you have here is just a system of black market in a sense. The free market becomes a legal black market. Now, any one person, or as they say, private agency, group of people can monopolize and then in turn become fascist. So now, even though fascism would be a state system, the difference would be anarcho-capitalism being a private system led by a dictator if they monopolize. There's nothing stopping somebody in an anarcho-capitalist society from monopolizing and becoming a fascist. So for that, anarcho-capitalism will have to also be a left-wing ideology. So this is how you have anarchy on both left and right, because in a capitalist society, what you have is, people in opposition to capitalism, and some people are willing to, you know, do anything, even if it's violence, to get away from the system. That's anarchy. Now, you also have a system where it's private ownership of the means of production with no centralization. In theory, that would be an extreme right, but in America, we don't see any right wing conservatives or libertarians with this ideology, so to say. If there are, please step forward. But by definition, just to be fair, off the basis of private ownership in a anarcho-capitalist society, this is why anarchy can be a right-wing ideology. But the root core of anarcho-capitalism came from a Marxist. How ironic. Now, I'm not going to get too in depth. Like I said, you guys can read this article, but for the most part, when you see anarcho-capitalism, it starts off as private ownership of the means of production, which would be a right-wing ideology in theory. So as soon as this system grows, you have monopolies forming, which would be, as they say, private agencies. If you ask me, it's just a government without calling yourself a government. And when they have the rule in their private society, they make the rules. That's fascism, even though they don't call themselves a government. So, just to, give you guys a little understanding of the political spectrum. Of course, it's a lot of work that you guys got to do on your own when it comes to this. This video is just to give you a brief understanding and why my political spectrum looks like this. Alright, family, catch y'all next time.